Morning, it's Miss Parnell here. This is going to be the video that takes you through the psychological disorders Google slides slowly so that you have time to write and you can write with me. So there'll probably end up being several videos made. I don't see how I can get all the way through it with all the pauses. It'd be an incredibly long video, but we'll just see how far we go and then I'll kind of put it all on the website. I know when you see it right now, there's links without videos while I'm talking. When you look at my screen, I'm going to put videos in there. So by the time you're watching this, that might not even be a problem. You might think I'm crazy. Like, what are you talking about? There's videos. But I do want you to go back and watch them. Either pause this and watch those or go back and watch them and stuff. All right. So a lot of this we did in class. I'm still, like I said, I'm going to write with you. That way I know how long it takes. So if this is stuff you already have down, you can go ahead and just maybe fast forward or something and pick up where you're at. So we talked about, the statistics with mental illness and stuff, and those aren't things you necessarily have to have written down. And the case study we talked about in class. And just the line of like what's abnormal behavior and what is a psychological disorder like mental illness and how you kind of draw a line in the sand. And it's harder than it looks to see exactly where that falls. Here are the sections of the notes. So the first section I'm going to write down is Introduction to Psychological Disorders. And then those are all the others. I don't know if you write them all down ahead of time or as you go. So this is the first one. Crash course we watched in class. If you haven't seen it, make sure you do. So basically you have a definition up first. And this is for maybe there's someone out there who didn't, who was absent or something and didn't get the notes. All right, so psychological disorders, here's your definition for that. It's a syndrome, which is a collection of symptoms. Make sure you put the parentheses part. All right, so it's a collection of symptoms marked by clinically significant disturbances in an individual's cognition, emotion regulation, or behavior. I know I'm not this quiet in class when you guys write. Maybe. It's a long time. Maybe it's just a long definition. So we talked about in class the word clinically means medically. So that's a really big deal because we're talking about something medically being significant with you. Symptoms are maladaptive or dysfunctional. If you don't want to write the whole thing, you need to write maladaptive and dysfunctional. Remember, maladaptive means bad, harming yourself. Now, we all think of like, oh, you got to be like physically harming yourself or something like that. And that's not necessarily the case. Like I say, not getting out of bed, not going to work, not maintaining relationships, marriages, friendships, parenting. That's very harmful to yourself. You can lose your job, lose your money, lose your relationships. And those are also pretty dysfunctional as they don't help you function in society. It's like the opposite of that, like not going to work, not getting a paycheck, not taking care of yourself. So that's what it means by those. Like it really has to impede your life, basically. And, like cleaning your home every weekend, that's not a disorder. But if it starts getting paired with like uncontrollable rituals, it's interfering with your work, your leisure, like that guy's case study we talked about in class the other day, that could be signs of a disorder. That was just a couple slides earlier. So then we talked about the early roots. These are not necessarily anything you have to have written down unless you just really want to. So if so, pause. But basically we talked about how, thousands of years ago, they thought there were demons, evil spirits, they would drill holes in people's heads so that the evil spirits could like escape and stuff like that. All kinds of crazy things, that are not real, not related to psychological disorders, but we didn't understand things then. And then going into a couple hundred years ago, people were considered mad. They were caged, they were chained. They're basically put into like a prison. They weren't helped. These places were dirty. They were disgusting. The people were not taken care of, medical, food, emotional, relationships, social, all that. And they would do all kinds of stuff from, again, like I said, drilling the holes in their heads, genital mutation, transfusions of animal blood, just, all kinds of crazy stuff. But thankfully, in the somewhat recently, a guy named Philippe Pinel of France was really against this. He did not like the brutal treatments. And so he started making places where people went that were not dirty, they were not caged, they were not chained, they were treated with respect, they were treated they were given like healthy stuff to eat. They were, hygiene, cleaning, stuff like that. And to kind of show this to the public and show them the importance of this, he started having these lunatic balls. And so the public would come in, they would have like a big dance. Of course, the people who were there who were crazy acted crazy. And the normal people, I guess, were entertained, for lack of a better word, by it. And so it sounds kind of weird now, but it actually did a really good job of like opening everyone else in society's eyes to mental illness and what goes on and how you can help the person and just that type of thing. Now, in the past, I would say the last century, we've really moved, in like half a century, we've really moved into the medical model, which means we understand that psychological disorders are just as much a medical component of your body as, like I've been saying in class, high blood pressure, something like that. If your brain doesn't make enough serotonin, then you probably suffer from depression, and that can be fixed the same way as if you have too high blood pressure, and we need to take that down. So they can give you medicine to make your brain make more serotonin, medicine to, lower your blood pressure, stuff like that. So we treat these people now in a hospital. They're just in a normal hospital. It doesn't even have to be a special one. There's just sections of every hospital for this. And we treat them with medicine, and we treat them, just clinically, basically, right? And again, still the cleanliness, the hygiene, the respect, visitors, all that kind of good stuff. And so that's the whole mental health movement. And so for this one, I want you to make sure you have medical model down. That's one of your vocabs. So I'll write that. So this is the concept that diseases have physical causes that can be diagnosed. That's what they would do, medically. They'd diagnose you with something, and then they would treat you medically. And so they can be treated, and in most cases cured, like medical stuff. Yes, ma'am. Your pancakes are over there, and so is your milk. You can go get a snack. This is going to be a theme. I just had a big talk. I was like, you cannot interrupt mom or talk to mom or even walk up to mom when she's talking to her computer and she looks crazy looking at the computer screen talking. And they both promised me, sure. We made it like maybe 5 minutes. So this may be a theme in my videos. Teaching from home is not that big of a deal, but teaching from home while I have 2 kids, one of which I'm supposed to be teaching myself because she's in school herself. And then I have like a toddler who's going to be wreaking havoc on everything. It should be interesting. It's no joke. So stay tuned. But let me get back to writing this down. You've probably finished in this time. But so it's a concept that diseases have physical causes. They can be diagnosed, they can be treated, and then in most cases, they can be cured through treatment in a hospital. So that's the medical model. This is like the theme of mental illness now. And like you see on there, many clinical psychologists work in hospitals and stuff now. Biopsychosocial approach, if you just want to write that down. We've talked about this component throughout several things in psychology. So the biopsychosocial, it's 3 words: biology, psychology, and like social, not necessarily sociology, but social as in your environment and stuff like that. So the biopsychosocial approach to mental illness and psychological disorders basically says this. It's a belief that psychological disorders are caused by a combination of genetic, which are the nature, and environmental, which are the nurture. So if you look over here, you got the biological influences going on, like your genes that you inherited, your brain chemistry, how much chemicals it makes, the structure of your brain. Psychologically, what's going on in your life right now, stress, trauma, mood, stuff like that. And then sociocultural is your environment. So what type of environment are you in? We talked about this. This is the time period in which we live. This is the place on the earth in which we live. And you can go from like continents to very specific like neighborhoods within Winston-Salem. This is the family you're born into. These are the friends, the friend group you're in, and other groups and stuff you're in. So all those come out, and you have different, if you can see here, different roles. You have different expectations. All that's different in every single group you're in. If you were in these groups, you would have them. If you weren't, you weren't. So this is all based on kind of environmental stuff. All right, so I'm gonna write this down. So believe that psychological disorders are caused by a combination of genetic and environmental factors. Do put the parentheses about nature and nurture. Trying to write fast. There's not a lot of downtime, so if I don't give you enough time to write, you can pause it. And then there's a video on it. Other thing I want you to write down is epigenetics. It's not something we're going to talk about a lot. It is in your book, so you need to know it. So it's the study of environmental influences on our gene expression that occurs without DNA change. So it's basically how our DNA changes over time based on our environment. So how they kind of interact together and like react together, basically. So study it, and it's not something we're going much in depth on or anything, so don't worry about it too much. So study of environmental influences on gene expression that occur without a DNA change. That's probably a good idea to write down the parentheses. It's basically how our DNA and our environment react. Because that definition might not make a lot of sense here. I mean, it kind of confuses me. So how our DNA and environment react. How they kind of go together. All right, and then we went into classifying disorders. So basically this is just how we organize everything, so it's not just like thrown out there, right? So we like put it in categories, subcategories, and make it make sense. And the way we do this is in a book called the DSM-5, stands for Diagnostic Statistical Manual. It's the 5th edition, so they've made several of them. And they change it up slightly each time, add more, condense more, consolidate more, take things out that aren't necessary anymore. And so make sure you have this definition. You can put what it is, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition. I'm just going to write DSM-5. That V is the Roman numeral for 5. They usually do it in Roman numerals, so don't think it's DSM-V. It's DSM-5. So it's a widely used system for classifying psychological disorders from the APA. The APA is the American Psychological Association. So this is, an American-based book, but it's used widely all over the world. As you remember, some of psychology was born in Europe, but really took hold here in America and became like a curriculum, if you will, here in America and stuff. So we're one of the forefronts with this. A lot of places in the world kind of have their own, but they really kind of, mainly everyone refers back to this, no matter where you are in the world, if you're looking at mental disorders. There's a video on that. That'd be good to watch. So like I said, the DSM-5 is used by medical professionals to treat mental illness. It's the 5th edition. It contains changes like autism spectrum disorder now, instead of just being autistic and having a mild case called Asperger's syndrome. They've now added things like hoarding disorder, internet gaming disorder, a few things like that, and it aligns with the World Health Organization's international classification of diseases so that it does match up with kind of worldwide principles and stuff like that. Here's a chart kind of showing you how common psychological disorders are. So you can take this one of two ways. The United States has the largest amount of psychological disorders, of mental disorders. Blue is any, red is serious. Excuse me. So we do have the largest percentage. If you look at the graph, maybe around 25, maybe a little bit more percentage. You can think of that one of two ways. Like, oh my gosh, people in America have more problems. Or America's more in tune to what's going on and more responsive to this. And maybe these disorders exist kind of in this amount all over the world, but we just recognize it and we treat it and we diagnose it and we talk about it. And there's not as much of a stigma, excuse me, here talking about it than perhaps there is in the middle of, Nigeria in Africa or, Shanghai in Asia. Maybe these places don't talk about them as much and you don't learn about them and it's more taboo. It's more like keep it to yourself, figure it out. You don't tell people weakness, whatever. And so you can look at it and say like, oh, these people have it together. There's no mental illness there. Whereas here, more developed places, France, stuff like that, where you can just look at like culturally, like how did they address it? I find it very hard to believe that everyone, I know there's some variance across the world, absolutely. But to say like, the United States has just proportionally larger amounts, like I don't think that's so. I just think we talk about it and I think we're at the forefront and I think we're addressing it and hitting it head on way more than some of these other places. And so that's why. In America here, the psychological disorder kind of breakdown, if you want to see what's more popular. Depression, we talked about, is the most common psychological disorder. So remember, it's called major depressive disorder. And they kind of have it with bipolar here since they're both mood disorders that you'll see later, but not quite 10% of all mental illnesses are that. Phobias are pretty high. Social anxiety is pretty high. So you can see right here a little trend with like the highest are the mood disorders and the anxiety disorders. So we'll get to those in a bit, but you kind of maybe have an idea of what those are and you can see they're more common. Generalized anxiety as well, post-traumatic stress, ADD, ADHD. Those are not in the notes, so I need to go back and add it. It is in your book. When you're reading this first module section, they have like its own little thing. So make sure you do get it. I just realized that, so I'll have to find a place to put that in. But some of the more rare ones, schizophrenia, thankfully, because it can be kind of a scary one. Obsessive compulsive disorder isn't quite as common and stuff like that. And then these are risk factors and protective factors. So basically what that means is that if any of these things right here are going on, you are at risk to develop a psychological disorder. And so remember I've talked to you guys in class, like my friend who has a biological father who's a schizophrenic. She doesn't know her predisposition. We're all this combination of nature and nurture, and she doesn't know the nurture. I mean, how do you know, right? So she doesn't know like how, I'm sorry, not nurture, nature. She doesn't know how nature-wise predisposed she is to it. Like she have a high, like, and it would just take a small trigger and it could come out. Or is it a pretty low? And it would take a lot of life stressors to actually bring this out. She doesn't know. And the thing is, you don't know till it happens. And she doesn't want to find out. And, I don't blame her. So these are risk factors that if a lot of these things went on, that could be enough to trigger it. If maybe one or two went on and you had a high predisposition to falling into something like depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, and one or two of these things happen, that might be enough to trigger it. If you have a pretty low predisposition, it would take probably several of these things happening at once to trigger it. But these are just things that could trigger it, like not doing well in school, birth complications, all the way down to like, living a hard life because of a low socioeconomic status, like needing money in the neighborhood or house or environment. Medical illnesses, abuse, substance abuse by parents, by themselves, stressful life events, stuff like that. Protective factors are over here. These are things that can keep it from happening. These are things that can help you. More of these things going on, hopefully the less a trigger would have to be to pull it out. So just exercising, feeling secure, that's emotionally, that's physically, like feeling like nothing's going to happen to you. That's financially, intellectually. I mean, there's a bunch that goes on there. Having good self-esteem, work skills, having supportive family and friends, intelligence and literacy and stuff like that, like going to school and learning a lot. Economic independence, that's the whole financial security thing. So those kind of go together. All right, and so then I'm going to stop the video here and I'm going to do a new one for each section.